Welcome to episode 49 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning talking to you from my workshop here in southeast London. It's April 2022. The sun is out here, the windows are open, and we've just had the Easter holidays. And the reason this episode is a little late is because we finally managed to have a glamping holiday in Norfolk with family and friends. Something we'd originally planned back in 2020, but with one thing and another, we had to cancel multiple times. But we finally did it, and the weather was glorious, and much fun was had by it all. And I'm feeling tired, but mentally refreshed and ready to get back to work. If you're a new listener, welcome. You have an hour or so of relaxed film conversation ahead of you today. If you're a regular listener, thanks for joining me again. And thanks also for your feedback and support. It really does mean a lot to me. And if you're a patron on Patreon, then thank you, you wonderful people. There are now 98 of you helping to fund the production of this podcast. I'm so grateful to you, eternally grateful. My target was to reach 100 or more patrons by May this year. So if you enjoy my work and want to pay me for it, it is work, then please check out patreon.com/Jamie Benning. That's JAMIEBENNING. And for as little as one $12 payment, or whatever currency you're working in, you can help contribute to the production of 24 episodes for the year. Do check out the different tiers on Patreon as well, as there's some perks for those who contribute more: artwork, merchandise, that kind of thing. If you're unable to contribute, please do continue to share, retweet, repost on social media, as well as tell like-minded film-loving fans about this very independent podcast. It's literally just me and my mic and my laptop and an internet connection. You can find me on Twitter at JamieSWB, on Facebook on the Filmumentaries page, on Instagram as Filmumentaries, and on MySpace in a parallel universe where social media has not progressed past garage bands and catching up with old school friends. I'm waffling. Okay, so for this episode, you'll hear my conversation with a founding member of Industrial Light and Magic, who's brought an immeasurable amount of skill and artistry not only to the original Star Wars trilogy, but also to the prequels: Indiana Jones, Men in Black, Pirates of the Caribbean, Jurassic Park, E.T. I mean, have a look on IMDb for this man. And the man I speak of is former ILM chief model maker Lorne Peterson. Now, Lorne was so taken aback by my interview with his colleague, industrial designer Nilo Rodis-Jamiro. By the way, that's episode 17 from January 2021, if you'd like to take a listen, that he felt compelled to talk to me. He said he found the Nilo episode quite emotional and, I quote, was nearly brought to tears. My voice broke up when I tried to ask my wife about something. It was an epic 33 years with many a milestone along the way, and every week brought new adventures, every day actually. We essentially got to work in Florence during the Renaissance. I'd contacted Lorne months before, and when I had no reply, I assumed he wasn't interested, and I was so pleased to hear back from him, not only because he's someone whose work I admired immensely, but also because an episode of my podcast was the catalyst for him to reply, which is great. I'm really pleased about that. Lorne joined ILM just as Star Wars was being made. He stayed for 33 years. So just think of the titles he worked on in that period and the changes he's observed through the industry. Our conversation went on for well over 2 hours, so it will be split up into 2 episodes. So both the episodes for April 2022 will be Lorne Peterson. The first one right here, and the second part will be up by the end of the month. So here's part 1 of my conversation with Lorne Peterson, chief model maker, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. So with your industrial design background, you were asked to come and join what wasn't even ILM then, I guess. But what was your beginning getting involved with George Lucas and Industrial Light and Magic?
The 70s, I originally graduated in fine art, but I took an industrial design class. My industrial design teacher said, I want to hire you. We're going to have a small design office. And I said, well, I didn't study industrial. And he said, I don't care. I like what you do. And, but still, it was hard during the energy crisis to find work. And one of the things I was asked by this person I worked in industrial design, McDonald's or a company that works with McDonald's wants you to carve big giant hamburgers and McDonald's and Mayor McCheese and things like that. And I wasn't going to do it. And then he told me how much money they would pay me an hour, which was like half as much more than anybody I knew at the time. And so I did it, and that's what I was carving with chainsaws and reciprocal saws and machetes and knives, these big giant block. You'd come in and they'd have a block all glued together. It'd be like, 8 or 10 feet tall and this wide and that kind of thing, And it was really dirty. No one wanted to do it. That's why they hired me to do it. And I was on the Hollywood lot where we did the carving, and I just had happened to go back to see how the project was going, because I didn't have to make the duplicates in fiberglass. I just carved the original, and came across Bob Shepard, who I'd known in college and in the same town in Seal Beach. And he said, "Oh my God, great, Lorne, you'd be perfect. We're having a hard time finding model makers for this science fiction film that we're doing in the Valley." And, I'd never even thought of working on films or any of that thing. Wasn't a big science fiction person. But money is, it was really tight then, really tight. And so yeah, I'll jump at that. I've jumped at all kinds of things, So I went there. I said I had a partner, a good, just me and this other guy. And I said, Art, if he comes along, he said, is he a good model maker? And I said, yeah, he's an excellent model maker. So we both went together and interviewed. And, it's kind of an interesting thing for someone that has nothing to do with film, but just generally working. When they got to how much the salary was, John and I had a shop rate, but you don't really make your shop rate when you're struggling, And so they offered us a salary, and then we had to go, we'll have to travel about 40 miles, and this isn't actually as much as what our shop rate is. And they went, let's consider that, as if go in the other room and talk to the money people. And they came back and they said, okay, you get more money. Well, about 3 days into it, Grant McEwen, who is the head of the shop, says to me, the day that you were hired was one of the best days of my life. I said, well, why was that? He said, well, they called me into the office and they said they couldn't be paying me less than they paid you. So I had to get a substantial raise. But it's known as, you would know it too, it's being in the catbird seat, and it's important to know when you're at the advantage in a situation, in a job hiring situation. It's not always true, but in that case, we recognized it immediately. And,
so where were the model makers in Hollywood? Why were they going to this new band of youngsters?
It's partly because, the old methods were, ship battles and airplanes on the Lydecker method, airplanes on strings and everything. And Lucas had contacted Doug Trumbull originally, who did 2001. And Doug Trumbull didn't want to do it. He wanted to do his own films. And he said, well, John Dykstra is my right-hand guy. And he is right at the edge of this new stuff, And so he got in touch with John Dykstra, talked to him, and Dykstra is thinking, we're not doing Lydecker, we're not doing ships on wires and everything. This motion control thing that needs to happen. Well, it was really rudimentary motion control that he was talking about, but he had a vision of what it could be. And of course, computers weren't what they were then. Then they weren't what they are now. And it was really a system. They looked like big black refrigerators, and we made them. ILM made them, and along with the equipment and the boom arms and all that stuff. It took a long time. John convinced George that this new method was the way to go, and it was more recording on tape. They put in a tape and recorded the program, and then that would play back. But it had lots of wires. Like I said, it was like 2 or 3 black refrigerators, and yeah. Anyway, it became a totally new method, and in a way, that was the way that other studios realized, oh my God, the golden egg is somehow attached to first ILM, but also that equipment that they designed. Mm-hmm. And they started designing their own equipment. Studios did, like Disney. Some successes, lots of failures. It took a while before they achieved what ILM was doing with their equipment. Creatively, the same. It's everybody's opinion on that one, you know.
It's kind of crazy that you were building everything from the ground up. But do you remember your first day, like when you walked into that warehouse? What was your first task?
Again, the task was very similar to the McDonald's thing, in one respect, and that was partly a task that other people didn't want to do, and that was working on the Death Star, because the Death Star meant crawling around on your knees on that very irregular surface. We eventually had these big foam knee pads. And applying those little retroreflective tape and all that stuff. So John and I did that for a little bit. Well, anyway, we observed that the model shop was right next door, like 40 feet away. And one of the things what they were doing was they were working on the Princess's ship, the Rebel blockade runner, and they were mixing 5-minute epoxy and putting the model part on and then putting tape across it, and then going to the next one and using the epoxy until it got hard and mixing up more 5-minute epoxy. And John and I, working in industrial design, were aware of superglue. It's called cyanoacrylate, and it was only available industrially. So I said to John, John, they're using 5-minute epoxy. It's going to take them forever. And so the next day, and I don't know how many days there were the gap between, the first Star Wars thing but it was only a matter, if it was a week was passed, it was too much. Anyway, I came in with some cyanoacrylate glue, and I was in the model shop, and I took a yellow Ticonderoga pencil, and I cantilevered it out over the table, and I said, everybody, the 6 of them, stop and watch this. And I put a little drop of glue, pulled my hands away, and the pencil remained 7 inches cantilevered at the edge of the table. And there was a gasp in the room. And well, that changed everything. It changed everything. The speed, you could just make these incredible engines, which I was the man to do that thing, mm-hmm. Everything from the back of the Millennium Falcon to the back engine of the Sandcrawler. And, I was good at tubes and pipes. I call it a mandala. I was really good at doing mandalas, mm-hmm. that kind of thing.
Where were you getting your inspiration from to do those? Like to make, because the thing that's always struck me about the models in Star Wars and the ships and everything else is that they make sense somehow. Yeah. We look at them and we buy it because of all the work that you did to make. There's the engine. Well, there's a pipe that leads from that, and there's an exhaust here. Where were you looking to get those bits of inspiration from? Well,
of course, we had a mandate in a way from George through Joe Johnston. Mm. But it was George isn't one to. I've never known him to sit down and tell you what he wants. I'll have some stories about that later. But Joe would do these drawings, and of course, sometimes they'd be simple, but they would have these things, drawn lines here and there in the back end, and it suggested this engine, and we called that boilerplate technology. We tried it, and I'm not sure it was ever on the mouth of George Lucas at all, But anyway, we called it that, and we said, okay, we don't want those spaceships like Flash Gordon, one mono panel. It's like, how big a panel can a crane lift a piece of metal to have the rivets to, that mm-hmm. kind of thing. Let's keep it in scale. It's similar to always putting a ladder into a model, up the side to a gantry or something. All our brains go, oh my God, I know what scale it is, because mm-hmm. there's a ladder there. It's nice cheat. And the same thing with boilerplate technology. You make a ship, you have to have welds to put those giant pieces of steel together, that kind of thing. And we talked about it amongst ourselves a lot, but the ball started rolling really quick. It's, once it wasn't just super glue, but I remember Grant, like the Sandcrawler, Grant starts making those planes in wood and everything. And then somebody is doing the tank treads. And I kept going over and trying to take it away from him. He's already got the basic form, and let's just go that engine and get those plates on. And pretty soon it became, it just made that transition from art department to model real quickly. Because at very, very first, when I got there, they actually did some plan drawings of the Princess's ship. It's like draftings and things like that. We totally dispensed with that aspect of it. It just wasn't necessary. You could go from Joe Johnston, a sketch, to a model instantaneously, and figuring out all the planes and angles and everything, from taking two-dimensional art to three-dimensional art, that was our job, and being a three-dimensional person, when I was in school, that was my, not necessarily specialty, but my strength. Just a blank piece of white paper can certainly be intimidating, like Nilo had said, especially when the paper is quality paper. As a student, it's expensive, and we just got the ball rolling, and it just some people said we never would have finished the film had it not been for super glue.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
Amazing that timing comes so much into the arrival of Star Wars, just in terms of the cultural arc coming out of Vietnam, and those kind of hardcore 70s movies, and then this simple movie, this good and bad kind of story with these wonderful designs comes along, and it there's so many stories about timing involved with Star Wars.
It was like you got to be so incredibly inventive all the time. It was, I've said to people in 33, 34, 35 years, I got to be in that zone 90, 95% of the time. I never left it. You'd rush to work in the morning, you'd forget what time it was to eat, and you'd go home late and get up early in the morning and do it again and do it again and do it again and do it again. And I frankly I have a family history of very good health. And I used to say that I could out health anybody. I could, I wouldn't get a cold for 4 years, 5 years or something like that. And, granted tired, but it never, it was so energizing to do what we were doing. It didn't matter.
And what did you do, when you're making the models? Are you chatting amongst yourselves, or is there music playing, or is there silence? What's the zone that kind of you prefer to be in, or what's the environment you prefer to be in to get into that zone?
Well, it's a very collaborative zone. Filmmaking is collaborative. It was the group of people, you just loved working with them. It was the various people at ILM went to either USC, UCLA, Long Beach State, Northridge State, Art Center, and Chenard's. Those were and it was like, somebody would say, well, I know a friend who's a great animator, from Cal Arts, and, bring him in. And then that person had another couple of friends that were great stuff. And, then somebody'd say, bring in another friend from Long Beach, and I think there were 3 of us right away from 3 of us or 4 of us from Long Beach State, was where I went to college. And also, everybody, there was only like 2 or 3 people over 30, and the youngest one was 19, Pete Coran, and his teacher at Cal Arts just said, leave here. Here's a phone number to call. You got a job. You're the best animator we got. And get out of college, forget it, and just start working.
What a great way to start work. I mean,
yeah, right. at first, it didn't take very long before, we weren't just making a science fiction film. It started, for one thing, Joe Johnston's drawings were just an inspiration. Mm-hmm. He just pumped them out and he really depended on us, a kind of a hand in glove relationship, to interpret what his drawings were. It was like he realized after a while, he only had to do really rudimentary a sketch to get the results that he wanted to do, because he had to walk down the stairs and, he was in the model shop, and he actually worked on the part of the models quite a bit too. He'd come down to take a break from drawing, to exercise a different muscle. And anyway, I ramble sometimes.
That's cool. It's cool. I found out today, which I didn't know, having been a lifelong Star Wars fan, I didn't realize that you used Formula One car models as part of the kit bashing, because I've worked in Formula One for 22 years now.
I understand that. Yes, we did. And there was a really lucky accident. And that was when I did the Millennium Falcon, I used one scale of Formula One exclusively on the engine and everything, all the parts and pieces. Well, it was Porsche racing Porsches, Formula One cars, both Williams, Ferrari, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden on Empire, we needed to do a lightweight half scale version. Those same kits came in a smaller scale, and so I could use exactly the same parts as I did for the large Millennium Falcon as the small Millennium Falcon.
So they were Tamiya Japanese models, were they, most likely?
Yeah. Tamiya, Asagawa, and Bandai were best. There was a few other model companies in Italy that we used, but those were the primo models, really, the kits, and all the German tanks and the Russian tanks and the Swedish tanks and American tanks and everything, and they came in 2 scales, or many times in 2 scales. It was Steve Gawley and I would go every once in a while to this warehouse for model kits out in the valley, and they give us a shopping cart. Each had a shopping cart, and we just go to the aisles in this warehouse and pull off 2 of this and 4 of that and 6 of that and 8. We'd always, numbers, duplicate numbers for these mandalas, and we'd fill up 2 shopping carts and then head back to the shop in a pickup truck, and we got a good price on them. But these days, those model kits cost a fortune.
Yeah, they do. And was there a particular model that everybody wanted to work on in the shop?
Well, a couple of real favorites were the railway guns, the German railway gun. Thor and Anzio Annie were 2 of the. They were very long-barreled guns that ran on tracks. But the Germans did a lot of half tracks and little half-track motorcycles, and really unusual. As somebody said, the U.S. kind of went for one tank and one kind of bullet box and one kind of Jeep. And the Germans were very inventive in engineering, like they did. Porsche invented they had several Jeep possibilities. They had, and the U.S. Apparently said, well, no, we'll only use 2 bolt sizes, that's it. No more of this trying to find the wrench. So, we got the big bolts and the small bolts, and the Germans were, well, I don't know, we do rivets on this one, and we do, so they made great equipment and uniform too, of course, a great uniform.
And did I've heard the stories about the Millennium Falcon being the original design, which then became the Blockade Runner, and it was too similar to the Space 1999 model, which was happenstance, apparently. Did you get to work on the Falcon?
Oh, Millennium Falcon?
Millennium Falcon, yeah. Falcon.
Absolutely. I arrived when they were doing the Princess's ship, when it got rejected because of the reason you'd said. And the Millennium Falcon wasn't yet. I'll send you a couple of photographs of very, very early stages. That was the beginning. So no, that was it was just the core of it was being built, and it was delivered to the model shop. And that's when I made that transition from the Death Star to the Millennium Falcon. And because I did these mandala engine things and tubes and pipes, and I used to say we looked at 2001 ships very slowly, or still photographs, and I realized that it had a lot of greeblies, great greeblies, but it didn't have the transitions between one and another. It was like if that's the plenum box that goes to the carburetor, there needs to be a connection between the two of them, and it needs to be logical. And, that all of these things need to be interrelated. It's not just as if, because people weren't judging in the same way in 2001. And in a way, we were given the freedom to do that. It's if it hadn't been all of these people of like mind from these various colleges working together and willing to break rules, there was no one saying, okay, people, time is money, and we don't need those little tubes going between the plenum box and the carburetor. That it'll fly by really quickly. Come on. Well, how many toys were sent? There were more toys bought than movie tickets, that kind of thing. And people to this day, there's Japanese guys that come here and just show me what they're working on, every little part of the White Star Destroyer, and reproducing it for Hasegawa and that kind of thing, and just they want me to talk about all these, what is this and what's that, and that kind of thing.
People get really obsessed with those details, don't they? Just as you would have at the time, being obsessed with trying to make it make sense. But yeah, I wonder, did you get to go to dailies? Did you get to see your work up on the big screen?
Yeah. Absolutely. It was, ILM is a very egalitarian place. It always was, although it changed over time. Originally the pyramid was like this, and over time, it becomes a business. The pyramid, starts to do this kind of thing, but it had this tendency to, flatten itself out, and it would, no. The troops would get in there and no, we're not, we do not want to do it that way. That kind of, the executives would backtrack a little bit, and kept that pyramid growing.
But what was your reaction in seeing some of your work there up on the biggish screen in the screening room?
It was pretty exciting. Yeah. Sometimes very, very early trailers had this pumping sound to it that they used, and they would play that. You would hear people running up the staircase to get up to the screening room. It would be like horses, galloping towards the upstairs screening room to see what we were doing. Yeah, we got to see, and that was when I realized who George Lucas was, because I had no idea what he visually looked like. And let me tell you this story that I worked many times when I got my teeth into it. I worked really long hours. Sometimes people would just leave, and it wasn't always me, but I would be there. And so I'm working away on either TIE fighters or Millennium Falcon, and in comes this bearded guy, dark hair with glasses, and he's wandering around looking. And I knew that if he got in the front door, he had to be there. The people didn't casually walk into the place, so I knew he had to be official of one way or another. And so I started talking to him and kind of explaining what we were doing. That these are the bad guys and these are the good guys, and there's a battle, and we're working on the these will be in the film as the vehicles that these heroes fly. And he came back maybe a week later, and I continued. He didn't say much of anything. I don't even know if he said hi. So then I'm in the screening room, and I realize all the questions are heading towards him, and I realized, oh my God, I was the director.
I've heard of that of George as well. There's another guy I interviewed who ended up playing Greedo in the original movie, a British guy, Paul Blake. And he said he arrived there and George made him a cup of tea. He thought he was like a runner or something, and it wasn't until he sat down with him for a bit longer he realized, oh, you're the man in charge. But that
Yeah.
it's interesting, isn't it? Because George is clearly kind of, testing the water there to see how you communicate back to him what he's trying to get you guys to achieve. Quite
It's after a while I had this thought, did they have a class in at USC in filmmaking that said, if you don't know how to delegate, you should try another profession. It's you have to hire people that you trust, and you have to give them a long leash, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And probably laying in the background, not always being right at the forefront of everything. Although in a way he couldn't help it. Eventually he just electrified the room. And, we got word one time that said, please don't everybody say hello to George in the morning, as he walks down the hallway. It's like, it's not his style. And you can imagine there's 150 of us, to say hello to him, all that stuff.
I was thinking as well, I can't think of any other film, certainly from that time, but where the first shot of the film is a special effect, a visual effect. Was there any nervousness from you and your colleagues about, the Star Destroyer being the first thing on screen? And because people have to buy that moment, they have to buy into that film immediately.
We visually could certainly see that it was spectacular. And I'm not, we knew that there was the crawl. We did the crawl and, that shot. And we knew that all of our work was really good. But here's the deal. When they had the cast and crew screening, we had always seen it without sound effects and without music. And it was unbelievable. It was a cast and crew screening, and they are not like a regular audience, and they're a little bit reserved. And it was just a gasp. The whole place took a gasp, and it just gasped. And it's as if the oxygen disappeared out of the room, and we were high. It was just everybody gasped, and the whole room. I don't know if they broke out in cheers or I can't. But it was, you could just feel the whole room vibrating, and it never stopped. And there's a funny story. My girlfriend at the time, wasn't interested in science fiction films and barely a little bit what we were doing. And she said, well, how will I know what you guys were doing when we were watching the film? I took her to see the film. And I said, well, I'll squeeze your knee every time something that I did, happens on the film. And she said, oh, okay. So I started doing like Morse code onto her knee. And she said, okay, I get it.
You guys did everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people will be listening to this, and very interested that, you were one of the major model makers that designed these things that are forever in our mind. I mean, I see the image of the Star Destroyer, the Falcon, the Sandcrawler, the Land Speeders, everything else in the trilogy. And I can't remember a time where they didn't exist. It's they've become, they really do define the word iconic. But what I'm sure a lot of people don't know is that you also are in the first Star Wars movie. So can you tell us about that story?
I'm in the tower in Yavin. And that's a very interesting story. What had happened was, the way we'd heard it is George had seen, through National Geographic, he'd seen the pyramids in Guatemala in National Geographic. And he said, that's the kind of shot I want, from the top of the pyramid looking out over the blah, blah, blah. Well, we got near the end of the film. We're March 1977. And Fox had said, well, how about using Jungle Land at Disneyland? And of course, it's like, well, you get up high and you see the parking lot and you see all the mechanism and, and said, well, it's a jungle, isn't it? And no, it isn't a jungle. The studios finally relented and said, okay, 2 people. You can have 2 people and the mechanic for the camera, or we chose that. And I remember, I talked to them and, my workload had kind of, John and I had gone back to our industrial design studio a little bit, my partner, John Earlin. And so I was at ILM and I knew that they couldn't speak any Spanish, and I spoke a little bit of Spanish.
Mm.
And I thought, well, they'd be a really disadvantage. You know, I've been to Mexico and traveled around my student days. And so I went to Gary Kurtz, the producer, eventually, and I said, hey, look, I'll go. I'll just volunteer to go. It doesn't matter to me. I'm free, and I love traveling, and good adventure. And he didn't say anything to me. He just looked off, in the distance. And I'm making this story a little bit faster than what the paces that had happened. Went to him a second time, had the same reaction. I told him what I would do. I just need to know when the planes leave, when the plane lands in Guatemala City, and then the little DC-3 into the jungle. And no, he didn't say anything. But like about 3 days later, there was a piece of blank paper with no letterhead on it that had typed out what planes left where, when they arrived, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, whoa, that's strange. So I signed up on the airplanes and all that kind of stuff. And when we got to Guatemala, I got on the same plane. There was room for me on the DC-3. There was a bed at the hotel, on and on and on. Well, I'll tell you the Guatemala story, but when I got back, I realized, it started to dawn on me what had happened, because underneath some papers on my desk was this check for more than I'd ever had in any weekly period of time, or a week and a half, 2 weeks. And it was, right to me. Didn't say what it was for or anything like that. And it was like, oh, the studios and Lucasfilm would be liable if anything happened to me, because he didn't have permission from the studio to tell me to go ahead. He couldn't do a wink and a nod and say, just go ahead with them. And here's the plane. Because then, if something happened to me, my relatives would be able to sue Lucasfilm and Fox. But it was a very interesting little lesson,
yeah,
for a young person who didn't have much knowledge of legalese.
Yeah.
But anyway, I did go, absolutely fortunately. I think we had 11 boxes of film equipment, in those big heavy duty boxes, and every single part was essential. And every time we moved from one place to another, we had to have one person at one site, one in the middle, one at the beginning. And the people who carried our things, we had to keep it in sight. Nothing could leave your sight to those 11 boxes to make it on the DC-3 and then the jungle. And then we had to go up through this, pulling our way, through vines, and practically it was really an Indiana Jones thing with ropes on these cases. And we hired about 3 native guys, and it was like sweaty work. And our original plan was to take the equipment down each night and store it take it with us to these palapas that we stayed in. But we realized that it wasn't going to happen. It took us hours to get the equipment up there. And so we hired a guy with a shotgun to stay up there at nighttime. But no one was going to make it up there at nighttime. You're jaguars eating dinner and, that kind of stuff. And so anyway, we were up there, and days went by when we never had a good sunrise or a good sunset. And that's what we were trying for. And so we tried it with one of the native guys. We had him in the outfit up in the tower. And, you had to do basic things. You had to, scan with that thing and stand with the pole. But he had no idea what in the world we were doing. And it was just like, that doesn't make it. We're all like, oh, no, he just can't get the, what he needs to do. And so I was the only one without children. And at the time.
That's what it came down to.
Yeah. Because we only had permission to do 3 pitons into the pyramid, little metal pitons. So the tower, you're up there about 12, 15 feet off the ground, and the pyramid is much steeper than an Egyptian pyramid. It's a much steeper angle. It's like about 7-inch step by a 12-inch rise.
Right. So that is steep. Yeah. And how far up were you then?
300 feet or so.
What?
Yeah, or a couple hundred feet. And if you fell, I had gone back, years later, like maybe 8 years later, and a tourist had fallen. They cleared away the jungle, and a Japanese tourist started to fall, and his either wife or mate went to grab him, and they both went over the edge and died. Because once you start tumbling, you would just keep tumbling over these rocks to the bottom.
So what, I mean...
Might be exaggerating in how high. They aren't that high. Not as high as the Egyptian one. The Egyptian one is about 400 feet, 480 feet. And they're probably half that size.
But I mean, yeah, anything above 20 feet, let's face it, is going to hurt if you fall down.
Do you know that there's a video that you can find on YouTube? Is that it's a funny thing where, you know, it says you've seen Star Wars 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now you've seen this story and that story, and then Star Wars 8 and now Star Wars 22, the story of the guard in Yavin. And it's the funny thing about the guy being up there for hours and not knowing what he wants, and they're trying to throw him up a sandwich or something to drink, and you can't get it to him, and then they go for a break somewhere and leave him there, and you know, it's a funny little video.
That's nice. That will come one day. But what were you physically inside? What was that made from?
It was a trash can,
right?
A gray trash can. And then back at ILM, we had attached a steel plate to the bottom. So there's a hole in the bottom in which you crawl up through. We put a ladder against I'll send you a picture of that too. People wonder, well, how in the world did you get into that thing? Yeah. Did you all over the top? Well, the bottom of a trash can is only, 20 inches wide or something like that, and kind of an industrial trash can. And so the hole to crawl through was very, very small. And then it had to have a steel plate to strengthen it at the bottom. But it was pretty wobbly. You had to get up there and then try to remain as still as possible for a while the wobble disappeared. And so it involved me staying up there for long periods of time. And I used to, the tourist, every once in a while, a tourist would come up, struggle up, and they couldn't see the cameras. They just saw me standing there with this outfit on, and I'd say, welcome to temple number 3, Temple of the Gods. And tourists would just like, this look on their face, like, what in the world?
There's probably some photos of you out there somewhere from Japanese tourists. And
there were tourists from France, from England, Australia, US. Anyway.
What are you thinking when you're up in that thing, though? Are you thinking, what the heck have I got myself into here? Like,
well, it was an adventure, and you're that age, and you crawl up cliffs that, later on you think, oh my God, I could have killed myself. That kind of, you do things at 29 years old that you don't ever would even think of doing at 59, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were having a great time. There's one fun story. I mean, I remember anecdotes forever. So we're having our first dinner in the palapa, and it was just always the same thing. It was black beans, chicken, and a beer. Black bean, chicken, and beer. What you got a sandwich? It was either a chicken sandwich, a black bean sandwich, or a chicken and black bean sandwich they would make for you. So we're having dinner the first night, and you have to know that there's a man named Pepe Lenzi who all of a sudden was there at Guatemala, and he was sent by the studio to be. He knew about 5 different languages, and he was the fixer. He got all the right paperwork from the Bureau of Tourists. We had these pieces of paper with a big wax stamp on it, that said that we had permission to do 3 pitons and stuff. So he was like a Marcello Mastroianni guy, Italian, very handsome, gray at the temples kind of guy. And he was used to, when we would tell stories about going in Mexico in Volkswagen buses, he would tell stories about meeting Ava Gardner, and being on movie sets, like real movie sets, not. And he was slumming. So the first night we did our thing. We get our coffee after the black beans and chicken, and this cake comes, and we each get a piece about 1.25 inches by 1.25 inches by about 1 inch deep, and with our coffee. And Pepe Lenzi calls over the cook went and says, we're from Hollywood. We're making a big film out in the jungle. Blah, 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 blah. The Hollywood studios, Fox Studios. Blah. I think we could have a little bit more cake. We're spending a lot of money in the village in the dirt. And so the next night, we each got a piece about 4 inches by 4 inches. 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches. And we think, whoa, that's pretty neat, And yet this young woman comes over to the table and she says, from now on, I'm eating with you guys. And we said, well, sure, sit down and all this stuff. And she said, do you know why I'm eating with you guys? He says, look around. Nobody got any cake tonight. You guys. And it turns out there was only one pan that was 9 by 9. And she had to divide it. About however many people there were that night. There would be usually like 10 people in the palapa eating, that's it. And so we had to call her over and tell her to go back to the old system. We were getting all these daggers from everybody.
You want to be making friends in the jungle, right?
Yeah, especially when we're sleeping in a palapa in the jungle and all that stuff. Yeah.
It kind of strikes me that it's odd that you were sent there in the first place to achieve those shots, given there are matte paintings throughout the movie, there are models throughout the movie. I wonder what it was about that shot in particular that George wanted it to be a real physical location.
Yeah.
Must have been something to do with that article he'd seen.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily privy to that information or how that happened. Certainly we're doing wonderful matte paintings. It might have been, here's something that happens. Sometimes at the very end of a film, optical is the choke point in films. And sometimes getting everything in the shot is a real advantage near the film. One take, everything is in the shot, that kind of thing. Because we only have one optical printer, and it becomes this chokehold on, especially when we were doing numerous films at the same time. That happened with Temple of Doom, which we'll eventually get to. But I don't exactly know why.
Yeah, it's good though, because you do buy that shot in the same way that you buy the effect shots. It feels real. It's rooted in that reality. So the film comes out. It's the biggest film ever.
Yeah.
How soon was it? Were you aware that a sequel was on the horizon?
Not right away, but we started. The assumption was pretty soon that a sequel was going to happen. It was so successful, and it's just, you can imagine investing $11 million in. I think, was it the total budget for special effects was $11 million, I think. Or was it the whole film? I'm afraid 40 some years later.
I think it might have been the whole film, around 11 million.
Yeah, it might have been the whole film. And then you get back hundreds of $1 million within months, that kind of, where you start it and 2 years, takes you 2 years to do it. And you're reaping this incredible income. But, we've embarked upon Galactica. After that, it's a little bit more circuitous route about that. John and I were asked to work on the R-rated version of Alice in Wonderland. It was like everybody that worked on Star Wars was thought to be an absolute magician that knew everything about everything. These other studios just assumed. They were calling us individually and asking us questions and asking us to speak and talk places. And the first place I was asked to speak with me and Grant, I had to go through. I was into 2.5 gin and tonics before I was ready to go. I was so nervous. Yeah, we started to do Galactica, which George Lucas wasn't happy about, but we had to. We'd rented the equipment from him. He owned the equipment, and we got a ways into Galactica. How far were we? When what happened was, the assumption was all of us had to go as a group together, and he had to do it in LA. Knew he wanted to do it up north where he lived, but everybody lived in LA. All the equipment was there, all the services and all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, Richard Edlin, who was the DP, he comes down to the model shop and he says, somebody up in the art department wants to talk to you on the phone. And I said, well, there's a phone right here. Why don't they call me, transfer it down here? And he said, no, Lorne, go up, talk on the phone to someone upstairs. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, he's real serious about this, or somehow, So I went up there, and it was George and Gary Kurtz, and they said, well, please don't talk about to everybody what we're talking to you about, blah, blah, but we want to send you a plane ticket and, have you come up. We want to talk to you about doing Empire Strikes Back up here and all that stuff. They don't tell you that. I assumed that Richard Edlund had already talked to them, but and I knew that Joe was doing artwork for them, but they didn't say, they didn't say you and other people. It was just like, whoa, what do you mean? And I'm thinking about this. Oh my God, this is like a tsunami heading our way. It's like they are bound and determined to do this. And in a way, what they did was, because they chose about 7 people, and as if it's the analogy I make is if for making a movie you wanted a custom made Ferrari, that everything is different about that Ferrari than any Ferrari that's ever before, and you want to have it serviced, and you want it to, and you're going to move it up north, you have to hire somebody who knows the carburetor, someone who knows the frame, somebody who knows the suspension, all that kind of stuff. You have to have that core of people at the very minimum that even not necessarily know how to make new stuff, but how to maintain what's already there. So, and that's what they did. They had to have somebody from optical, they had to have somebody from camera, they had to have somebody from model, they had to have that kind of thing. Someone from mechanical. And so I went up north, empty warehouse, it was just, wow, a beautiful place to live, and all that stuff. And of course, you're asked to do something like that, and you're just, the opportunity of a lifetime. Even though you're doing damage to relationships, it's a once in a lifetime thing. You're gonna be able to climb Mount Everest with a team of just very few of you, that kind of thing. You don't say no to something like that.
And you kind of had to start again as well with the empty warehouse, and you had to start from the ground up once more.
One of the interesting things is that we needed to. This mountain was in front of us to be climbed, and the building was empty. It was, except for 1 or 2 offices in the front and a reception desk. Everything else in the back was empty. And so we had to get going on things. And somebody, not me, came up with the idea. We told these carpenters, he said, okay, bring us 12-foot 2x4s, 18-foot 2x4s, 8-foot 2x4s, 6-foot, 3-foot, cut just stacks of these things. If you have a 24 2x4. And so we laid out the walls and the doors with the 2x4s. This department will be here and this department will be there.
Just on the floor, yeah.
On the floor, we laid out these 2x4s, and then just told the carpenters, just go ahead and build walls and doors. And if we want a new door when we didn't anticipate it, we'll have you cut a hole. And the carpenters just went with it. So there was no architectural drawings of what we were doing, what we wanted. And there was an interesting thing that electronics was not represented in the group that was putting the thing together. And I noticed that, somebody would think, well, it'd be better if my wall was 2 feet further over this way, and then you could make it to there. So electronics kept getting smaller, narrower. And it was like, no, it needs to be a little wider than that. We can't have a 12-foot wide trough. But anyway, eventually we just said, well, we want a staircase right up there. And we want a second floor, and we wanted to do this, wanted to do that, but no one did drawings for it. It was just little sketches. And the carpenters and the plumbers and electricians, I think they loved it, to be able to work like that.
Yeah, I bet. I think, I can't think of at that time, sequels were kind of the land of diminishing returns, weren't they? Quick, it's popular, let's get a sequel out now while we can, while the interest is still there. But it's always struck me that with The Empire Strikes Back, that wasn't the case, and George wanted to better what he'd done before. He wanted to improve on what he'd done before. How
You're
much pressure
absolutely right.
was there pressure on you guys?
The studios calculated, how much a sequel would diminish. Yes. But excuse me, I didn't. I interrupted your question.
That's right. So was there pressure on you guys? Did you feel pressure to kind of do better work, or did you feel like, if we can achieve what we've achieved before, that's going to be enough? Did you feel like you needed to push further?
Well, this is something that a director and George Lucas would do. But originally, I was told, well, look, Lorne, you'll have to maintain the models and everything that's there. But we've got the Millennium Falcon, we've got the Star Destroyers, we got the X-wings, TIE fighters, Y-wings, and it'll be a little bit easier for the model shop. Well, I took that hook, and so it became absolutely aware with the drawings that Joe was doing that, oh my God, there's zillions of new things, And so that wasn't true. And really, oh my God, we are embarking on really something here. This is a really much bigger deal. It's a much bigger deal than Star Wars. It was having to hire and make models at the same time. I'd get like 3 portfolios a day, or something like that. And trying to deal with and interviewing people, and a lot of. It's like some of the people that had that industrial design background or industrial molding and background weren't artists. And then you'd have artists who didn't necessarily have any technical background, and it was hard to find the people that matched up with that, what I wanted, what I needed. Sometimes I looked and looked and looked, and sometimes you can't, when you're in that position, especially after Star Wars had come out, you realize that some people you're fulfilling their absolute dream. It's like, this is to be hired by this guy that's standing in front of me would be the fulfillment of my life and my dreams, and you think, wow, that's kind of a burden you don't want to hold, because you're having to say no an awful lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it was a whole different kind of pressure on that movie because, you're still having to maintain the quality you've had before. You're Oscar winners, you've got to better it in some ways because people expect more. And then you've got the pressure on you of, as you say, of hiring these new people. I mean, I've spoken to Craig Barron, who was employed around that time, worked in the Mac department. I've spoken to Pat McClung, who was, brought on Empire a bit later on. But was it difficult to kind of have this core team that you'd had on Star Wars and have new people arrive, kind of unsettling the status quo, as it were?
My mandate from those two, George Lucas and Gary Kurtz, was to not steal people from LA. They said hire people from up north. Well, there wasn't that pool of people, and so right from the get-go, I'd said, well, I need Paul Houston and Steve Golly in the model shop. Those are the people I absolutely have to have. You'd feel absolutely bare naked if you didn't have those two guys. So they came, and it seemed like a long time, but yes, we did put a great crew together. I interviewed and found some people. There were some great model makers. Michael Fulmer was unbelievable. He wasn't always a team player. He had his attention to detail. He made these model airplanes, an unbelievable level of model airplanes. And sometimes I had to hold him back from, making absolute perfection. One time for E.T., I noticed he's showing something of the E.T. bicycles. They were, this big. And I go over there and he's showing them the handbrakes, and I was thinking, they don't need handbrakes, It's like, God, if the production people come by and take a look at this and they see, well, what are the handbrakes for? Why are they doing the pinchers on the wheels? Why cable?
To that level. So that's one of the skills, though, of doing what you do, I guess, is knowing what is going to translate onto the film. You know, what are you going to see and what are you not going to see?
Yeah.
Did you have to experiment with that quite a bit in the first movie then, with
Well,
knowing what would and wouldn't work?
You get a feel for it pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, I think we always erred on the side of more incredible and overworked, overdone. You knew that you always got more brownie points from George Lucas and Joe Johnston if you just did incredible stuff, real magical things. And probably if Spielberg had seen the handbrakes, he would have been like, "Oh man, look at that! I love this stuff," that kind of thing. So everybody realizes that kind of stuff. If there's money, there's time, and aesthetic quality, and aesthetic quality always won. Well, and time had to be there. We had the time was this roadblock, the end of the tunnel. But we did a lot of the things weren't cheap.
Mm-hmm.
You had the world was at your fingertips too. That here's an example of a thing for one in Raiders. I needed it takes a while to explain why I need it, but I need a 12-foot by 12-foot piece of saran wrap. And I called around and everybody said, "Oh no, we do, we get our manufactured. It's already cut to this size and blah, blah, blah. It's manufactured back east somewhere. That can't happen. No, it never happens that way." And so I just kept calling. Finally found the company that actually makes the thing. They said, no, it can't happen. It has these big cutting machines. And I call back and say, "Could I talk to somebody else?" And finally I get a call back at my desk from this guy that says he's the president of the company. And he says, what do you need? What are you doing? And I tell him and all this stuff. And I really need blah, blah, blah. And he says, "Well, the only way that could happen is if somebody observed, like from my office and my window looks over the factory floor, if somebody observed that when they got to the end of the roll and told them to take that roll and mail it to you, that's the only way it could happen." And so a couple of weeks later, this like 12-foot roll of cardboard thing arrives, and it's like 80 feet of saran wrap, at the end of the roll before they've taken the cardboard thing. And it's like things that happen over and over and over again. And I tried to contact and say, "Well, how much did it cost?" There was no bill. And said, "Oh, no bill."
Really?
Yeah. Just glad to be able to be a little part of Star Wars is worth more than gold.
Yeah, I thought the opposite would have happened by the time you got to Empire, where everybody knows how much money's been made and everybody's trying to charge the earth for it.
We were secret. You wouldn't reveal your name for a long period of time. You knew when to mention the word Star Wars, and you knew when not to mention it. And there were lots of times not to mention it because of that. But you get pretty shrewd after a while, when you're in the catbird seat, like I said, no, that we are at the advantage in this particular situation. You are loving what we were doing, and I'm at the advantage.
What was the... Go on.
Not that I took advantage of people, I didn't.
Yeah, sure. What was the step up for Empire with regards to the model making and the design and everything? What do you think was the level up that you made? Because there clearly is one. It looks amazing still today, that film.
Yeah. One little example of that is that with the Millennium Falcon. The Millennium Falcon was very heavy. Granted, if a person put their back on it like a backpack and a strong person lifted, they could get it off, get it up. But it took 4 people with these sticks, big rods that we'd stick in the side to move it around. And it moved very slowly on the motion control. You had to, very slowly. And then George comes up with this idea of the Millennium Falcon going through the asteroid belt and down into the asteroid. And it's no way in the world would that Millennium Falcon, it would take out days and days and days of, gradual little movements to film that shot. And stage time is worth so much an hour. That it's all those things are allotted. That this has to be shot in a week because that's all the money that's been allotted to do that particular shot. And if you deliver it late, you're sucking off money because the deadline is still the same. So it was like, we have to build a 2-footer. And we made it in thin aluminum and every lightweight material we could. And, one person could lift it up and move it around and turn it on the rod and all that stuff. And so it did that shot very quickly. And then it was like, well, if you can make a Millennium Falcon that's 2 foot in diameter, how about a Millennium Falcon that's 4 inches in diameter? And how about one that's 2 inches in diameter? That kind of thing. So once that happens, it's realized, okay, we'll make a Millennium Falcon to attach onto the back of the big detail of the White Star Destroyer, and that kind of, and now we need a small one on the bottom of the hospital ship, that kind of thing. It keeps growing and growing and growing. And I know we only have an hour and a half. I've spoken for 4 hours before.
I'm happy for this to come back to this, Lorne, because I think this could be a double episode as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my conversation with Lorne Peterson there. As I said in the intro, part 2 will be up by the end of the month. That's April 2022. That will also be about an hour or so of conversation. Next up in May 2022, I have another extraordinary artist, namely Michael Pangrazio, the map painter. Can't wait to talk to him in just a couple of days from now, actually. Oh, in fact, tomorrow. I need to do some more research, watching more of the wonderful films that Michael worked on. I'm also hoping to chat with composer Daniel Pemberton. I'm still chasing cinematographer Greg Fraser, who recently won the Oscar for Dune. He's been a busy man. I'm also still trying to get hold of costume designer Marlene Stewart. It's very hard to pin down a date with people who are still actively working in the industry, but I'll keep trying. And actually, Marlene got back in touch with me after an email I sent out this morning, so hopefully we can line something up for May this year. Anyway, rest assured there will be another 16 marvellous episodes in 2022 for your listening pleasure. Thanks for joining me. Do continue to support me either via Patreon or by retweeting, sharing, or verbally telling your friends about the podcast. I hope you can join me again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.